First of all, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. It's a piece of your life. It's probably the most valuable thing you have. And so I hope that this is interesting to you. To some of you, it may not be new. To others, it'll be very new. But I think it's a really, really exciting topic. And I think when we look at the dairy industry and our ability to adopt technology, it's pretty profound, right? And I have a slide deck that isn't included in this, but when we look at the average cow in 1944, anybody know how many pounds of milk an average cow in 1944 made? Anybody care? Just curious. About 4,600 pounds, right? And so I think as an industry, our role in sustainability, the things that we do in our industry, we do so much more with so much less. It's really a profound thing, and I think technology plays a role in that. And so as far as Merck Animal Health is concerned, we had a pretty good line of products in preventatives and treatments in Youngstock, but what was the piece that was kind of missing that we thought we could fill? Anybody want to guess? Anyone? Okay, it was monitoring, okay? And this was really a journey that started for us. Data collection to get to the Youngstock application that we have for monitoring now really started in 2016. So it was a long, long journey to get there. There were a couple of years where it got really hard to do it. I don't know, there was anybody remember the pandemic? That kind of slowed us down a little bit. But 2016 to where we launched it officially in March of 2024, we really spent a lot of time collecting data, looking at what we could do, and what we really found was we could find calves that were having an abnormal day really, really early, okay? So when we tag, we are still, we pride ourselves on having the ability to monitor calves. If the tag is applied in the first 2 days, we can monitor them and give you actionable insights at 27 hours. So really kind of exciting, and it really changes the paradigm. So, we have this discussion about, do we find cows before clinical symptoms, right? How many people think we do? This is like participatory, so how many people think we don't? How many people don't care? Just curious. Okay, so here's a question for you. What's the difference between clinical and very, very, very mildly subclinical? Does anybody have a... Okay? Physical signs, no physical signs, right? But like if it's me looking at calves, if it's laying on its back with 4 legs up, I go, okay, this calf is clinically sick, right? But not everybody has that ability that I have to find a sick calf. That was a joke, okay? So this is the essence of SenseHub Youngstock, okay? Now, if you look at this picture long and hard enough, you can probably see most anything, but you see rows of hutches, right? So there's what, 5 hutches in the front row? And you can see more hutches and more hutches and more hutches, right? So how many people think the front row on the right would be a hutch to look at? Come on, raise your hand if you think that. I'm giving you the answer, right? Okay, thank you. So those of you that raise your hand, you've already used SenseHub Youngstock, right? Okay, that is an ear tag lighting up on that calf, okay? And coincidentally, that would probably be about the right number of calves that we would light up in that group of 20-some hutches, okay? So when we look at Youngstock, when we look at calves, it's one of those areas in our industry that probably lags behind in terms of our ability to monitor performance. Anybody disagree with that? It's probably really, traditionally the more neglected piece of our industry. And why is that? It's probably because there's just an absence of really good data, right? So how many people know of a site where all the treatment records get written on the hutches and then they lose them all when the hutches get pressure washed? Right? How many people believe that they have really accurate human data to look at calves. So the end result of that is, and to me this is really kind of interesting, it's a little bit old, right? So 10% mortality between birth and weaning, probably a little bit high, right? I think we're doing way better than that now. But the question is, just because a calf lives to weaning, does it mean it enjoyed it? Right? And even worse than that, is when we look at morbidity, right? The range is, some people argue it's 30, some people argue it's 50% morbidity, right? How do we measure morbidity in calves? What's that? If we found them, right? If we treat them, then we know we found them, right? And we never not treat an animal that needs it, and we never treat an animal that doesn't. And by doing it that way, we can calculate morbidity, right? Sounded stupid, didn't it? But anyway, that's how we look at morbidity, right? We say, how many calves did we treat? Okay? And so I don't know if that number is right, but I don't know what that number is. 30 to 50% is a pretty broad range in morbidity if we're looking at a national average, right? So what are the challenges with Youngstock? You guys all know this, so I apologize, but it's in my slide deck, so I had to talk about it. Calves don't want to show you what's wrong with them, right? So when you're walking hutches and you're looking at a calf, and you stop and focus on that calf, what does that calf want to do more than anything else at that moment in time? Drink milk. That was a joke. Okay? It wants to look healthy, right? They've been selected, they're herd animals, they want to look healthy. So when that calf doesn't look healthy, when you're standing there looking at it, you're probably behind the 8 ball. Anybody disagree with that? If you do, throw something. Not eggs, because they're expensive. Okay? But that's the problem is we spend how much time looking at a calf in a group of calves? How much time do we spend looking at a calf a day? How many people say a minute? Nobody. How many people say 3 seconds? Right? 3 seconds, is that a fair number? Okay, so let's play it this way. If I went to your family and I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. You guys are going to look at your family members for 3 seconds a day. And everybody here, your job is to look as well as you can look when this person looks at you. What are the odds that you're going to find a sick family member? Right? So that's kind of what we're up against. They don't want to look sick, right? They want to hide that. Secondly, how do we know when there's been a shift in what we're doing? When there's been drift in the protocol? Anybody try to track that wants to chime in and share? What's that? Drug usage, right? Drug usage, if I see it go up and I go, okay, it fits, it's in this season, it kind of makes sense, but I can follow drug usage, right? Which kind of goes back to that morbidity piece, right? And thirdly, oftentimes the first sign of failure is the failure itself in a program. Is that unfair? Okay, and then we backfill it with a whole bunch of other stuff, but these are kind of things to think about. So how easy is it to find somebody with the proper skill set to find sick calves? How many people think it's easy? How many people think it's hard? How many people are waiting to get to a beer? Okay, so it's not easy to find those people, nor is it necessarily inexpensive to train them and find out they're not the right person. Is that fair? Everybody really wants to do a good job. I really believe that. Most people want to do a good job. Not everybody has that skill set to go out and look at a calf. Some people can look at a calf and say, that calf's going to scour tomorrow. Some people just don't get it, okay? Then we go down to how do we measure, how do we find changes in how we're operating, right? So drug use, if drug use goes up, does that always mean there's a problem? The answer is yes, right? But what is the problem? Is it the people? Is it the training? Is it drift? Or is it a calf problem? Right? And even if drug use doesn't change, how do we know that they're treating the right animals, right? Go back to, how do you monitor when animals get shots in a herd, right? Well, you measure the number of shots they gave. Was that always accurate? Right? I can remember back in the day saying, okay, we'll find out if they're giving the shots. What you do is sell some cows, don't enter it into your herd management, leave them on the list and see what happens. And those guys, oftentimes they were so committed to what they were doing that they went down to the auction yard and gave those shots. That's commitment, right? So really, even if we see drug use, it doesn't really indicate to us that we're on track, okay? And then thirdly, oftentimes when we find problems, it's late, or we never even knew it, right? It's a 2-year-old that calves and never produces, and we don't know why. Is that a fair statement? Okay, so question for you is, what's the most expensive calf to raise? The calf that dies at day 0, the calf that dies at 6 months of age, or the heifer that lives and probably should add a change earlier on, right? So we really don't know that. We really don't know what happened to that 2-year-old when she comes in. Humans are really good at recording things, and I can remember begging people, please just stop recording calf health events. Just stop. They go, no, I need it, right? So what's the problem with humans reporting calf health? It's subjective, right? And even if it's the same person, is it the same person every day? They show up and their kid failed PE or whatever course it is they failed, and you're at work and you're thinking about my kid's future's over because they failed PE and all those sorts of things, right? So they're not even the same people that show up every day. And that really becomes a big challenge. Okay, so if 3 seconds is about the right number, I have a question for you. Which of these 3 heifers is not having a great day? So the first person that's paying attention says, wait a minute, there's only 2. I took calculus at college. There's 3. Okay? So there's 3 ear tags, right? There's an ear tag off to the right. But we've already spent more time looking at this slide than the average site will ever spend looking at these 2 heifers today and tomorrow or this week combined if they're walking. Anybody disagree with that? Yep. So which heifer is not having a normal day? The one on the left, how many people say, everybody's got to vote. One on the left? The one on the right? The one in the middle? Does that help? Okay, that is the essence of SenseHub Youngstock. It's not a diagnostic. It's helping us focus on the animals that need attention. Okay? So we find animals that are not having a normal day. And we're pretty sure that sick animals are not having a normal day. Is that fair? So when we see an animal with a light on, does it mean treat that animal? No. What does it mean? It means your best people can focus on those animals with lights on and make a determination what to do, right? So that light will change morbidity and mortality just as much as a thermometer. Not a very good sales pitch, is it? But the reality is, what it does is it allows us to focus on the calves that need attention. So the analogy I've used on farm is to say, what we're doing is, you show up to work, and if you have 3,000 calves, and you're the doctor, how many patients do you have in your waiting room on your way to work? Right? You show up to work, how many patients do you need to look at today? 3,000, right? They're all patients. But what if we could say, no, it's not 3,000 calves you need to look at. It's a very, very small subset of that, the calves that are having an abnormal day. That's what we do, right? So the goal is to empower your best people to focus on the calves that need attention. And so any of you that were here for Louis Borba's presentation this morning, that's really the essence of what he said. It allows us to focus like a laser beam on the calves that need attention. Okay? So this is dairy in California. They put the system in, and he says, yeah, you know, instead of looking at 850 calves, we could go look at the 20, 30, or 40 calves that are having an abnormal day. Any questions at this point? I must be doing an amazing job. Okay, so the tags are really, really cool if you like electronics, but nobody here cares about that, right? So when we apply a tag to a calf, okay, it initially says, okay, this calf is a pre-weaned suckling calf. The tags actually have a processor on them, and they collect all the movements of the calves. This is okay, if this calf is suckling, this motion means one of these 10 things, one of these 10 behaviors, okay? So we're not just looking at motion, we're saying, okay, this tag doing this for 1 minute means the calf has this activity, okay? Then it blocks that, and it starts a new minute. And it just keeps doing that. And then at multiple intervals per hour, it transmits that data back to the PC. The tag doesn't know anything about the calf, but the system does. So the system takes the block of data, it applies it to that calf, and it says, is this calf behaving normally relative to its history? Does that make sense? Okay? So, suckling calves have a top secret behavior that we look for that I can't divulge. But once they stop suckling, we don't see it anymore. That was a joke. Okay? But when we move the calf out of a suckling group, it tells the tag, hey, change the algorithms. Now we're looking at a post-weaned calf. The behaviors are different. Does that make sense? So if we look at the progression of a calf, we have the weaned calf, the suckling calf, okay, and that goes with any calf that's in a suckling group. Calf transitions to a weaned group, and then ultimately transitions at 12 months to our breeding age heifer rat. Okay, and then it can transition to the cow app, which is like the full lifetime of the animal. It's kind of cool. Okay, so here's the nitty-gritty. So when the tag is applied, if it's applied in the first 2 days of life, in 25 hours, or 27, something like that, ballpark, it will start to tell you if that calf is having an abnormal day. If it's applied at 7 days, it's going to take 7 to 10 days to baseline, okay? So it's kind of important that those tags get in, they get assigned to the calf close to birth, and at that point, we can return actionable information in approximately 25 hours, 27. When we move the calf to a different group, the algorithms on the tag change. There's tremendous behavioral changes in the calf for the first 25 hours, right? So we go dark, we have a gap of about a day between the time, well, that's cool, isn't it? Not really? Okay. So we have a gap because the algorithms now have to recompile, and then at 27 hours, 25 hours after we move them to a different group, then we start to see the same data. Any questions so far? It's always the individual, great question. So the question was, is it a group thing or is it an individual animal thing? It's always going back to the individual animal, okay? So all the tag data for this tag, right now it's very confused, right? But that goes back to one record, and then it compares that block of data to the normal for that particular animal, okay? So in the software, here's where you'd assign the pen. You'd say, okay, it's a suckling group, or it's a non-suckling group, or it's a heifer group. And then the algorithms on the tag change based on that. So the question was, the normal is established in the first 24 hours?
Yeah, if you would put the tag earlier in the calf, how long will it take to establish the normal in the calf?
So if we get the tag in the first 2 days after birth, okay, then in 25 hours, we'll be able to tell you that calf's having a normal day or not. Does that help? Okay.
Her first baseline, let's say you have a calf that's not off to a good start, then you get her up and going. Does it always go back to that first 2 days of life as her baseline, or will she be baseline again?
So the question was, if a calf is born, it doesn't get off to a good start, then when it does come around, does that become part of that animal's baseline? Absolutely it does, okay? And so one of the things is that chronic calves, and we learned this really early on, that if we apply tags to older calves and we let them baseline, 7 to 10 days they'll baseline. Guess what? If a calf is a lunger, guess what it baselines as? It's a totally normal lunger, right? Because again, it's comparing that individual animal to itself, okay? So that first day or two becomes part of that animal's history that we compare to, but that gets washed out pretty quick after 8 or 10 days. Does that make sense?
What about animals on bottles versus buckets?
So, great question. Animals on bottles versus buckets. This system, because we're looking for that magic behavior that I can't tell you about on suckling calves. Keep saying that, right? So they have to be nipple-fed calves, okay? We are not using it on milk-fed calves with buckets. Really good point, thank you. Okay? So this is the essence of what we're doing, okay? How many people, I'm just curious, please raise your hand or don't, but I'd like you if you did. How many people believe they have a really well-developed training program for the people that are walking their calves? Okay? And how many of you believe that you have a really good way to transition to a new person walking the calves? What we're doing is we're looking at every calf all the time, 24 hours a day, and we're doing it the same way. And this is a health index, so it was designed really with me in mind. So the only reason Merck really hired me was they said, look, we got to figure out how idiot-proof this is, so we'll hire Brandt. If he can see this and he understands it, anybody will get it, okay? So 100 health index is an animal that's having a perfectly normal day. A health index of 0, it's not really 0, it goes to 40 is the lowest, but a health index of 0 means either the calf or the tag has stopped functioning, okay? So 100 is totally normal. The default that we have is if she drops below 86, that's the threshold that we assign for a calf that's not healthy. And that is actually exactly like we do with the cows. And we designed it that way so that we didn't have this disparity between the two indexes. So if it's below 86, if it's 85 or lower, we know that calf's not having a really normal day. This list says, here are those calves. So I know which calf is having the most abnormal day based on this list. Okay? And it gets recorded. So we can push it to third-party software and say, this is a calf, had an abnormal day today, and this is how abnormal it was relatively. Is there any value in knowing that? How many days a calf had an abnormal day? I think it's fairly significant. We're doing it the same way every day, and we're recording it. Okay? And then, the really cool thing is that we can turn a light on to your schedule. So we can say, okay, if you're going to start walking calves at 5 a.m., at 5 a.m., turn the lights on the calves that are having an abnormal day. And we want it to run for 2 hours a day, except on Sundays, we're going to do a little different. We start at 6 and leave them on for 3 hours. So that all is based on your schedule when we turn the lights on the calves. Kind of cool, okay? To me, that was a really big piece because, you know, if I went out to a calf ranch and I said, hey, we're going to give you this really cool list, and all you got to do is look at the list and look at the calf, what happens? Nothing, right? They're not going to do it because it slows them down. It had to be faster for them than what they were doing because, again, people all want to do a good job, right? And if it slowed them down, even if it was better, it wouldn't really get acceptance. The LED light changed all of that. That gave us the ability to say, okay, you have the list. You can go out there with the list, but look for the calves that have a light on. So here are some different methods for detecting calves that aren't having a great day, right? So visual observation. So sensitivity and specificity. Anybody comfortable with those two? So in the context of what we're talking about, specificity would be the likelihood that if we say a calf is having a normal day, it's really having a normal day. Sensitivity would be if we say this calf is having an off day, there's a really good reason for it. It's a little kind of a twisted version of specificity and sensitivity, but we're not diagnosing an animal. We're detecting an animal that's having an off day. Everybody clear on that? Okay, so these different methods, how good is visual observation? Okay? And ultrasound is really, really good as long as it's not digestive, right? So when we look at our system and we looked at the sensitivity and specificity in those contexts, anything below a health index of 86, if we said it was having a normal day, 97% of the time, it was having a normal day. Does that have value? Grasp that and weigh it. Isn't that cool? Okay? So if we put a calf in a bucket saying it's having a normal day, we're pretty sure it's having a normal day. Okay? Sensitivity, you go, well, 63% or whatever that number is, right? A little bit low. So what does that tell us? In the context of how we're defining it, what does that tell us? 63% sensitivity would mean when they get in that bucket of calves that are having an abnormal day and somebody looks at them, they'll go, oh, that's clinically sick. So that means 6 out of 10 lights, we'd say, yeah, if somebody looked at it long enough, okay? What's the major difference between these data and these different techniques here? Can anybody think of a difference between these two in terms of the ability to execute? How often would you do ultrasound? Infrequently, right? You could even argue visual observation is somewhat frequently, right? Infrequently. So visual observation, how many people here walk calves 3 times a day? Anybody? Okay. How many times a day are we collecting data on these calves? Every minute of every day. Okay? So every time the index is recalculated, it's a new test. And to me, that's really the power of this, is we're watching the calves all the time, and we're looking for those calves that are not behaving the way they did yesterday. Okay? So this is a link, a QR code to a shameless white paper that has all those things in there. Okay? I didn't add a couple of slides I had from a study we did in Spain, an internal study, again, a white paper. Really well-run place, and about 5,000 calves, I think a really large calf ranch for Spain, but very, very much an American-style calf ranch. And I remember the numbers vaguely. When they had roughly 400 calves in our system, 400 calves that were outside the system as a control. So how many people think they treated more BRD in the control group? Come on, participate. Like, this is supposed to be fun and stuff. How many people think the monitored calves had more treatments for BRD? It was the calves that were monitored. So we had about, I think it was 20% of the calf population that was monitored was treated for BRD versus just about 10% on the controls. So that's really cool, right? You get to treat more calves if you put the system in. That's not cool. But what is cool is that when we looked at the ultrasounds on the ultrasounded calves in both groups at weaning, we virtually eliminated the lung score 3s. Okay? I think it was like 1.2% versus 6% in the controls. What's that tell us? For those of you that were here this morning with Louis, what's that tell us? We're finding them a little bit earlier, right? And I think their death loss, which is probably the very lowest bar, as Dr. Wilson would say, it's the very lowest bar you can possibly set for calf performance. But death loss went from 8 or 9% to 2. Okay? And also interesting in that study was that they had a surplus of veterinarians operating at this place, and they temped all the calves post-weaning every Tuesday. And then we looked at those calves post-weaning every day of the week except Tuesdays and Fridays. The system found more calves than the staff. But Tuesdays, they temped everybody. And the treatments went through the roof on Tuesdays. And then they were slightly higher on Fridays. Why do you think they were slightly higher on Fridays? They had a 3-day recheck on everything they treated. So now they're looking through this pile of heifers they got to find that they treated on Tuesday, and inadvertently they find other animals to treat. But what's really interesting is we treat more in the hutches, but far less out of the hutches, which kind of goes back to what Louis at Lumar Dairy was saying. We get them off to a really good start. Okay, any questions? I'm sorry? It doesn't work? I didn't think anybody really used it, so I just made it up. Oh. If you're interested, come and see us after, and we can make sure you get to it. That's shocking it doesn't work. Really good question. So the question was, how can you get data on a calf at 25 hours if it's at birth, but it takes 7 to 10 days to baseline on cows or even heifers that are older than that? Okay? If you think of it this way, we don't know the calf well, right? At birth, that's for sure. The calf doesn't have a baseline, right? The next version will monitor them in utero, so it'll be much more accurate. Okay? Tagging them is going to be a little hard, but that's okay. So, but really good question, and the answer is If I take a calf, a newborn calf, and I put it in the middle of my living room or a hutch, how different will the behavior be? Not that different. And so we there's a whole transition where we look at the age, the tag application, and then we build the baseline out, and there's all sorts of algorithms that go into that to say, okay, we know here, and we're probably a little on the sensitive side on those newborns, but we'd rather be that than the other way. Does that answer your question? Any other questions?
How are you establishing the baseline gas efforts that are getting transported all through the Midwest, coming from different locations?
So the question was, how do we establish a baseline on calves that are getting transported all over, right? The answer is they're going to baseline where they got, right? So if a calf is coming from a dairy, odds are that tag's going to go on when the calf hits the calf ranch, and we'll baseline there.
When it goes to a different heifer yard, will it re-baseline?
Yes. Yep. Really good question. But yeah, it'll move to a different site, and it'll re-baseline at that site. Yep.
When you move from ear tags to collars, will you lose that data they had in the past before the collars, or will it just?
So the question was, when we move from ear tags to collars, so if it's cows, we're going to put collars on springers. So the short answer is yes, because the Youngstock system operates in a platform called SenseHub, and if that record, if the dairy is using SenseHub on the cows, that record would continue on. But those records normally are transitioning from SenseHub into Dataflow, which is our predominant dairy cattle management system in the U.S. now. So over time, those records will still be there, Clint. So you could go back and you could look at it, and that data gets pushed to the third-party software. But ultimately, right now, if you're going to Dataflow with collars, then that record gets archived in SenseHub, and then we move over. Yes. Yep.
Have you compared this data to some of the data collected on auto feeders, like drinking speed, for ability to detect disease?
So, yeah, a great question was, have we compared this to auto feeders? The very short answer is not extensively, okay? But even the auto feeders are really good, right? I mean, there's some pretty good support out there to say, yeah, we can see suckling and we can see the duration of suckling and all those things. Ours is using suckling, but it's using even more than suckling. And when that calf moves out of the robot, then we also have that baseline to see how that transition goes. But the short answer is no, we really haven't compared it to robots. Any other?
Does budding at an early age in life mess with the baseline of the calf?
So the question was, does this budding at an early stage in life affect the behavior of the system? Not really. Not really. We absolutely haven't seen that. So, especially if it's early, right? Which most everybody's doing now.
Can you use the same sensors for the calves and the heifers?
So, really good question. Can you use the same sensor for the cows and the heifers? Absolutely, the very same device. So the really cool thing is the system says, oh, okay, you're transitioning from a suckling calf. It tells the tag, change the algorithms, bundle the data differently. So all these different activities that we can see panting, we can see rumination, we can see eating, we can see the secret suckling behavior, all those things. Then the tag is told, bundle it differently because now that calf is weaned, and then bundle it differently again once it gets to 12 months old. But the tag, the way the tag operates, the algorithms on the tag change, tag's exactly the same tag. Same tag we use in the cows, if you're using ear tags. Good question. I'm sorry? Yep. So on the heifers and the calves, most of our heifers are in the SenseHub system. The antennas are a little bit different for SenseHub and data flow, but essentially the answer is yes. And that's all part of this whole system. So Youngstock it's a subscription-based model, which to me, it's interesting. That really seems to fit with people's cash flow. And when you look at a subscription model, it's almost considered a service. So if the tag fails, if the tag has to be replaced, and you're on the subscription model, the tag just gets replaced. Okay? And the lifespan for the battery, the tags are warranted for. See, this is where I'm not I'm not a sales. I'm the worst sales guy Merck has, so it's kind of funny I'm up here. So the tag life is supposed to be a 5-year life. I think it's warranted for 4. But on a subscription model, again, it doesn't matter. The tag fails, the tag gets replaced. Good question.
And if you're going to use this on breeding animals, how many heats would you guys like to see before we start using the system for breeding?
So really good question, and stay tuned. Because the answer is, we would like to see these tags on breeding age heifers long enough to baseline before they go into the breeding pen. So 10 days before. We have tremendous success with heat detection on heifers. Cows, that's even an interesting question, isn't it? But on heifers, obviously, if you put them on early enough and you monitor, we're going to kind of stay tuned for that answer. But 10 days before they go into the breeding pen, then start breeding off the heats.
How many different third-party platforms can you import data?
Question was, how many third-party platforms can we integrate with? We're open to integrate with almost anybody that wants to integrate with us, but we integrate with 4 big ones in the dairy market. So right off the top of my head, Dairy Comp, Bovasync, DHI Plus, PC Dart. Okay, and then I'm sure there's some other ones in there. Any other questions? Guys, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate your time and listening to me, and hopefully there's a little bit of insight in there. Thank you very much.